Welcome back to another episode of the Sell Like a Leader podcast, the podcast for revenue leaders who are on a mission to cultivate high-performing sales teams. I'm your host, David Kreiger, president of Salesforge, the America's leading sales outsourcing, appointment setting, and lead generation company. And I am bringing you today an amazing revenue leader, Frank Sondors. Frank comes with over a decade of experience in B2B sales as a top contributor, all the way to leading large sales team. And currently, he is building Salesforge and other forges, which we'll talk about what that means, to help B2B companies generate more sales pipeline and reduce the cost of blending humans and AI agents, which is a hot topic right now. And they are an explosive growth trajectory with 3 million in ARR in just the first 12 months and looking to get to 10 million ARR in the next 12 months. So let's get started. Welcome to the show, Frank.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, it's good to be here. Yeah, it's spent over a decade in sales. And then probably by the end of it, when I was leading a sales team of about 50, it was too comfortable, I think, selling a software to somebody else. And I thought to myself, why couldn't I just sell a software, keeping all the equity to myself in a way, right? I did get 2 co-founders because I can't code. Typically, most salespeople cannot code. So I got 2 smart cookies through YC matchmaking platform. Essentially, it's like Tinder for startup founders. I found 2 really cool guys, what I call the 10X Silicon Valley engineers that I found in Europe. And then I started and kicked things off. But yeah, I spent, as I said, decade in sales, started my career in big corp. So that's Google. This is where I got my digital academy training and all things digital, ad tech, martech, you name it. So all the cool processes, how things can be automated to the fullest. And that's something you can really see in Google really well. And then I transitioned to work for a bunch of SaaS companies. This is where I fell in love with SaaS, tech sales, in SaaS in particular. And I stayed in SaaS for the whole of my lifetime, really. And I'm probably going to be always in SaaS unless I'm going to exit with essentially Salesforge and I become essentially a VC probably. I already have a name for it called Bacon Capital. So in our line of business, it's all about bacon, bringing home the bacon and stuff like that. So really the reason why I decided to also start my own thing is because I saw that when I had the sales team of 50, and back then it was a growth at all costs, right? So I was ultimately the main lever to target attainment was just having more bodies, right? And I didn't think that was the right way to looking at things, acquiring more revenue, etc. But this was really the main way because all the tech essentially that was in the space, it was orchestrated around having more heads, right? So more heads means more revenue, more pipeline. And I thought to myself, wait a minute, I hired hundreds of people in my life and I fired hundreds of people in my life in sales. And I always had there's always this sort of typical math that for every 10 salespeople, only 1 person is really the natural. 2 to 3 people can be trained up to be somewhat good as the person that's natural. And then 60% is what I call dead wood. And if you have those numbers in mind, and why are we hiring the 60% in sales, right? If they're not accretive to your organization. And that's because you have a target to hit. So all these extra bodies that they do help you to hit that target. But we all know that typically the top 20 or the top 40% of the sales population drive the majority of the pipe, the majority of the revenue in your organization. And I thought to myself, what if we could increase somehow the output of the 40% and get rid of the 60%? And that's exactly what we're up to here at Salesforge. We're trying to make companies leaner and meaner, help them to attain their target with the least headcount possible, and doing so what we call with the highest probability using big data behind the scenes. So yeah, that's what we're up to.
Yeah, the way that you're doing is really, it sounds like the idea of copilot mode, right? Where you're trying to blend AI agents and human SDRs so that they can work together seamlessly. And I think there's been a lot of tools thrown at us over the past year and a half with AI. And I think lots of sales leaders are trying to figure out, how do I incorporate this, and trying to find good use cases for it. And I think there are maybe a million, but it's hard to curate that and figure that out. So maybe just starting with the big picture, how do you look at a well-functioning collaboration between human, and let's talk about SDRs because that's, I think, the focus, right? And AI agents look like in practice?
Good questions. There's a lot of tech and what I call a lot of legacy tech and big tech essentially in the space, which essentially is all catering for humans only. And then there's a lot of cool, fancy new tech popping up, which essentially they're saying, hey, we're building these AI agents to replace humans in full. But then you as a sales leader, you're faced with your current tech that you have, which is designed for humans, and then there's a bunch of extra tech for AI agents. Now, if you're really smart, and I wish everybody would be smart, but if you're really smart, you're going to be thinking typically like, hey, I really want these two things to coexist in one place. And the best way to look at this is I typically bring up sort of Google Ads. So if somebody's familiar with Google Ads and how you typically run campaigns in there, you typically have these sort of campaigns, what's called a manual bidding. So these are essentially human campaigns. And then there's campaigns that popped up a few years ago called automated campaigns, where you just set up the target CPA. So what's the cost per acquisition that how much we're looking to pay essentially per lead. And then Google will optimize the bids according to the target CPA. That's exactly how we're thinking about the world of what we call humans, SDRs, plus AI SDRs. It all has to coexist in one piece of software. So it's very easy for an SDR manager or a sales ops manager or VP sales to go into the software, run their sales team across email, LinkedIn, VoIP, and then also and additionally to be spinning up these AI SDRs. And an example of that, so let's say you're a big org, right? So let's say you have, again, 50 salespeople, just like I had. So the 50 salespeople typically will go after key accounts because according to unit economics, it makes sense that we all focus on these key accounts in these particular territories like US, etc. But then we have ROW, right, outside of the US, right? Maybe we want to go after a few accounts in France or Germany, etc. But we don't really speak the lingo, right? What if we can spin up an agent where we can test the market, for example, let's say the French market or the German market, and that's exactly where you could, for example, leverage the AI SDR for, let's say, just testing purposes, right? So to understand whether there's any traction with what is it that you're selling outside of the US, right? And that's something you don't have to hire the rep that speaks the lingo, right? You can spin up an AI agent that actually can do that for you. What does that actually mean in practical terms? In practical terms, and what an AI SDR can do really well in the world of, say, email or LinkedIn, there are some issues with work, meaning calling. There's some regulatory issues. But let's say in the world of, like, if we just take email as an example, you would set up your ICP within the software. So what's the ideal customer profile? Then we would source the leads. It's called Agent Frank. So Agent Frank would source the leads for you across multiple databases in the world. And then we would craft a unique and relevant email to each and one of those recipients in the language of your choice. So that the uniqueness comes from two data sets. So what we call the sell data, or what the heck do you sell? Why the heck you're reaching out to people? And then we combine that data set with what we call the buyer data. What is it that we know about each and every single recipient? So we go and access the LinkedIn, we go and access the website, we go and access a bunch of other sources. So we match these two data sets, we use LLMs on top of that, and then off we go, we deliver that unique email, and there's a couple follow-up emails that are uniquely crafted as well for that recipient. Now, if the recipient replies back, then we use essentially what we call a knowledge base, where you can upload a bunch of information about your business, like a sales playbook, etc. Where if the prospect replies back, essentially we can have a conversation back and forth, all the way down to actually booking a meeting, fully autonomous on autopilot. And the way that we book meetings is you just hook up your HubSpot calendar link, maybe your Calendly link or Google Calendar link, right? You hook up to the engine, and then the agent is responsible for actually booking meetings. So while I'm talking to you, Agent Frank currently books meetings for me. So now it works in a lot of cases, but in some it doesn't. You also need to have what's called naturally product channel fit. So apart from having PMF with your product, which is a prerequisite for anything typically to work, you also need to have a product channel fit. So naturally, if you have never tested, let's say in any form of cold emailing, reaching out to people at a particular velocity, then don't expect that some form of agentic capability may be able actually to do that much better to an extent, essentially, where it actually works for you. So I always ask and try and talk to businesses and sales leaders, hey, are you actually sending currently any form of cold emails? And then a lot of people say, no, it has never worked for us. And then what makes you believe that this actually thing will work for you, right? So even though the agent will do a great job, relevant emails, everything will be super, super nice. What makes you believe actually that it will actually work? Yeah, so there's a lot of tech that's in space. It's quite heated, especially on LinkedIn, right? So a lot of people will say, yeah, the SDRs don't work because all the emails are just junk, etc. But you have to also think about it, that this whole tech is in its infancy. It only exists for a year or so. That means all the players in the market haven't been even around for 2 years. So we haven't even been around for 2 years. And there's essentially a lot of room for this to improve, right? To orchestrate the right experience, right? The right way of using the AI agents. And that is yet to come. And I think this year is the year where we're going to see a lot of fantastic agentic workflows that a lot of sales leaders will be utilizing, essentially, all right, to drive more pipeline coverage at a lower cost per unit. So yeah.
Yeah. So as you're trying to think, or sales leaders are trying to think, what is a good workflow for AI? Basically, I think if I'm understanding what you're saying, is first you need to validate it with humans and make sure it's been working, or it's a channel that's worked with your prospects. Because if you haven't necessarily been able to validate it, you're not necessarily going to be able to validate, at least where we are with the tech right now with AI. So validate first and make sure it's a channel that works, and then go in and try to leverage your learnings to be able to leverage AI to do this autonomously without human intervention. Am I capturing that correctly, Frank?
Yeah, because ultimately an AI agent is not there to get you that product channel fit. What the AI agent does, it just does things faster, cheaper, and slightly better than the human, right? But it will an AI agent, I don't believe an AI agent will be ever able to outperform the top rep in your organization, but it will outperform all the averages, essentially, the B's and C's that you have in your org. That's what the AI agent is really good for. But yeah, essentially, if you haven't never done this in the past, and a lot of companies, or whether you just span up your startup from the YC or whatever, you have never done anything like this. So don't assume that there is a product channel fit by default.
Okay. And the types of tasks right now, at least, and maybe you can talk about right now and maybe in the
Mhm.
future, and maybe you can elaborate on some of the regulatory challenges with voice and things like that. It sounds like really doing the lead research and trying to leverage AI to really analyze. And we've seen that in Salesforce a lot. It's really been very good at analyzing lead lists, being able to do some of the web research that SDRs had to do in the past, looking at websites, looking at LinkedIn, and then creating some of those workflows that are more written in communication on LinkedIn and email. Is that right? Or are there other workflows that you really think are ripe for AI to help as a co-pilot?
Yeah, so it's definitely qualifying the list, the leads before you would engage, so you don't send emails to the wrong people or non-ICPs essentially. So qualification, all the way down to sourcing the right leads, then all the way down to crafting the messaging, all the way then we're going over to handling replies. It's a huge process, right? Making sure that you are responding literally within minutes back to the prospect, because time kills deals, kills opportunities, etc. I see a lot of reps that don't respond within 2 hours when once you got a reply back. Essentially, if you respond later than that, then the probability of getting that individual on the call drastically reduces. And then actually book a meeting and following the process, right? Day in and out. But yeah, right now, a lot of agentic capabilities are definitely popping up also in the world of LinkedIn. You may have observed that. And then also right now, they're also coming into voice. Though there are some regulatory restrictions where using any form of agentic capabilities on outbound, meaning doing literally a cold call, is not legal under the robocalling directive. That may change, but essentially there is a directive where you can't use any form of sort of automation to be calling people out of the blue in the world of B2B and B2C, but you can do that naturally with humans, right, in the world of B2B. But we are seeing fantastic agentic capabilities on inbounds, right? So once you get the opt-in from the user, I highly advise for you to explore a bunch of solutions that are in the market right now for the voice stuff, because ultimately you can set up an agent to be calling literally within the 2-minute SLA. And on inbound, it's super important because only three things really matter on inbound. One is the leads, process, and then the speed. And most of the sales leaders really forget about the speed component, which drives pipeline and conversion rate. And if you're struggling to make sure that your reps are calling your leads on time within a particular SLA, then voice agents are fantastic, right? And much, much cheaper as well.
That's great. As sales leaders try to implement AI, is there any type of reporting that is unique to AI? Or are you using the same type of metrics you would use to manage a human as you would an AI?
I would say the metrics are exactly the same. So the only thing that the head of sales or the CRO are asking themselves behind the scenes, how much is this costing me and how much is that costing me? So you could calculate what's this costing me like per demo, right? So you can calculate, okay, I have this human headcount and the cost per demo is let's say $500. And then you can do the same calculation for the agentic stuff and you can be like, okay, how much is this costing me? And then you can realize whether this is much superior CAC metrics for you or not. But that's not something that you would look at within the software. So within the software, it's exactly the same metrics. What are the reply rates? How many meetings are we booking, etc. Whether this is the AI agent or the human, right? And this is the benchmarking that you can do, right? And you would expect naturally in a bunch of cases that humans outperform, and in some cases the AI agents outperform if you're running a bake-off, right, between the two capabilities. But my belief is that you should be having these two things running in tandem, right? You just need to figure out what's the workflow there. But because ultimately by using both, you're unlocking more pipe at lower cost, right? So that's why I'm a big believer. It's not either one or the other thing that you should be using both at all times. Doesn't matter whether you are a day zero founder all the way up to Fortune 500. I think there's always a space for AI agent within pipeline building workflow.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think some leaders hesitate to implement AI on some of the forward facing interaction because they worry that they might lose some of that personal touch, that relationship.
Mhm.
They might come off as sounding like AI. How do leaders strike that right balance between automation and real human engagement?
So there is a way to set up, let's say in our case, right? So if you are not comfortable with AI, right? So you want to get used to it. We have what we call the not the autopilot mode, but the copilot mode. So essentially where the human intervenes a lot more. For example, in the copilot mode, when you do get a response back from your prospect, any form of reply, the AI agent will stop and you will jump in as a human. Right. So you'll get a ping, let's say in Slack or as an email, you're gonna get that ping and then the agent stops and then you take over, right? So that's the copilot mode, and the autopilot mode means that the human does not really intervene unless the agent doesn't know what to do. So typically most companies, not all, but most companies, what they will do is they will set up these what's called guardrails, right? Making sure that the agent cannot say something that is not in line with what is that we're selling, for example, right? And that's technically speaking is called gatekeeping. So essentially, you gatekeep, for example, content. So when we're about to send an email out, for example, to another human, we scan that piece of email. And if there's any form of hallucination, so we use another AI agent to check that email. And then if there's any form of hallucination within that email, then we will compute it again until it will pass the quality checks. So some agentic capabilities may not do that, but these sort of guardrails are super important to make sure that we don't send random content out, right, to prospects, right, to making sure that we're protecting your brand, right? And also the same thing actually happens when we're about to reply back to the prospects. For example, what the agent does, let's say the prospect asks, how are you different to this competitor? Or what is your pricing, for example? So then what the agent does, it checks all the available documentation about this business that's available within the software that the human uploads and will only reply based on what's in available. And if we get a question from a prospect where we don't know the answer, the agent essentially will stop. So there's an eval that we're doing essentially on the reply as well. We're checking, okay, is this a good reply? Is this a bad reply? And if the confidence drops below X threshold, then the agent stops and informs the human saying, I don't know what to do in this particular case. Here's a draft reply. Please adjust that reply before we send that. So there's a lot of these things that you're essentially where you're trying to make the actual users more comfortable with the AI. But I would say it's like the internet moment where people are just getting used to using these AI agents because 99% of companies still today have not used an AI agent. And I think this year will be the massive AI agent wave where the adoption rate will massively increase from 1% over to, God knows, 10% or whatever is my take. Because, a lot of people have the appetite, but yeah, there's still, because there's all these companies that are building these AI agents for different functions of the business, whether that's sales, finance, etc. Because we all live in a capitalist society. We all want to be generating more revenue with the lowest possible headcount, right? And AI just is exactly the thing that can unlock that wish of the society that we live in.
And to achieve that, I think sales leaders are very familiar with onboarding, training of their sales team, and AI agents, right? Need something similar,
Right.
right? Training, refinement, like you said, have that human guardrails, just like you would have manager guardrails in some ways. So, how do you look at effective AI training and optimization?
Good question. We do a couple of things, main ones that make a big impact. First one is looking at, so we are sending these unique emails to our prospects. So let's say the AI agent does that. And then we're looking at what sort of response are we getting back? Are we getting positive responses or negative responses? And essentially, this is where we have a mechanism in place where we're essentially saying job well done to the AI, right? When we get a positive reply, when we get some sort of good reply. But if we get a lot of bad replies saying this was a horrible email, etc., then essentially the AI learns from that. I'm trying to put this as simple as possible, right? So essentially, we're looking at what the prospect responds back to us, and that goes into the engine essentially, and that's something that we use to optimize the messaging further. So if we're getting a lot of positive responses based on this sort of messaging or this sort of style, then a lot of messages start essentially change for the next batch of emails that will go out. Let's say the next day, the style of the emails would change towards the type of emails where we get more sort of positive replies. So that's one way of doing this. The other way that we do it, we look at also so we have thousands of customers already by now. And what we're looking at behind the scenes is, okay, we have, let's say, a lot of customers from the same industry. Let's say fintech as an example, right? And they're sending the emails to the same ICP. So we are also checking across all the customers what sort of messaging works and what doesn't, right? So we have what we call cross customer learnings. that we apply behind the scenes. So it's similar thing that Google does, right? It will apply learnings across thousands of millions of its customers, right? And we show those learnings essentially in a compliant manner. And that's exactly what we do, right? We're trying to figure out what works or not when we run millions of emails. We literally send millions of emails a day, right? So we have a lot of data that goes through, and then we store that data, we log that data, right? We label that data, and we do cool stuff. Cool stuff meaning we're trying to improve the conversion rates for our customers using all of that data that we have access to.
Okay, interesting. And so, you know, looking forward, as AI gets better,
Mm.
as we coach it better, as it gets better within organizations, we're in copilot mode right now, and there are some autonomous things. But as it does get better and as sales leaders become more comfortable leveraging AI, how do you see the traditional SDR role evolving? And are there certain skills that humans really need to focus on that are uniquely human that an AI won't be able to replicate? Or do you feel like over time that this is really moving more and more towards an AI world?
So we're moving towards an AI world, whether somebody likes it or not, right? So you can embrace it or not. And I believe people that are better off are the ones that are naturally going to be embracing AI. So that means, what does that mean? So when you go into a job interview and you're interviewing somebody for an SDR role, as an example, you would typically, and if they've done a bunch of SDR roles, you would typically ask one of the questions, hey, what sort of AI tools have you used? And if the rep says, I've used none of the tools, then it's a red flag. And so immediately, like I would not hire the rep because you're trying to get your job done. You're trying to book meetings, right? And you should be using simple tools like ChatGPT to get your job done. And if you're not using even the simplest tools in the market, then I don't really think that the rep will be able to get to the pipeline of targets as effectively as another rep that uses AI agents, right? So it's super important from perspective of kind of hiring standpoint to be using these agents and these tools, right? Because ultimately the output levels of a rep that uses the AI agents, etc., should be and typically is higher than those reps that don't use anything. And what I'm seeing with the type of skill set that we definitely all will be looking for in the future, we're going to see a lot of these reps that are going to be becoming more senior. Essentially, what I'm trying to mean is there's this sort of thing that's trending right now, also on LinkedIn and also around the world, which is what's called a GTM engineer. I call it sales development engineer. Essentially, SDRs that are able to do technical stuff, right? That typically a sales ops manager would do. Because, for example, they're looking to stitch tool 1, tool 2 to build a list, etc. So we're gonna see in the future a lot more SDRs that are technical than just a lot of kind of juniors, especially that's coming out of college, right? And that's something that I'm definitely observing. And naturally, these people who are a lot more senior also get paid a ton more as well. But then the contribution to the organization from a sales pipeline standpoint, humongous. So essentially, one of these individuals can replace typically up to 10 SDRs. So this is why we're going to see more senior folks in the SDR function that are able to do the work of multiple SDRs using a bunch of cool new tech in the space. It's not just our tech, there's a lot of other tech, and all of that tech is designed towards generating higher output levels, essentially, with very little headcounts.
Very interesting. Frank, that's a fascinating perspective. It's going to be interesting the next few years to see how companies like yourself really impact efficiency in go to market and how SDRs can become that much more productive. Before we go though, I would love to ask you a few rapid fire questions that we ask all of our guests. Does that sound okay?
Sounds good.
Awesome. So what is one thing people don't give enough value or attention to in leadership?
Listening to their employees, I would say, and like really listening, because naturally there's a bunch of employees that are in the front line, whether that's your customer success managers, your account execs, etc., right? Because they're in the trenches, right? They're speaking to your prospects, your customers on a daily basis, right? And like really listening to your account execs and customer success managers is super, super important. And so yeah, that's the number one thing. Listening more to your employees that are in the front line, talking to your customers on a daily basis. Yeah, that will be the topic.
Awesome. That's great. What's one skill you advise everyone in sales to master?
It's very similar to the first one. Listening more to your customers and not just listening and saying, okay. So you really want to figure out what the reasons why people buy your stuff and the reasons why people don't buy your stuff. And you want to go to the rest of the organization and feed the organization, right? And you can only do that if you're really listening to your customers and trying to jot down these super important reasons why they're buying our stuff, why they decided to go ahead, and why they would want to buy our stuff, right? So we can optimize the whole process. Super important. So yeah, listening to your customers a lot more. And you'll be surprised the number of sales leaders and also founders that I'm speaking to on a daily basis that don't speak enough. So even myself, I'm a CEO of a company and I have a huge team, but even I manage to speak to, and I literally jump on at least 10 calls on a weekly basis with customers, listening to them proactively and then proactively essentially asking questions and then trying to feed our system and feedback to improve the product, to improve the service, etc.
That's awesome. What's your favorite business leadership or sales book?
I would say one of the favorite books is Never Split the Difference, or the other one is Tech Powered Sales by Justin Michael. These would be a couple that I typically recommend. But there's a bunch of sales leaders that I do follow on LinkedIn. Because I'm a founder right now, I do follow quite heavily Jason Lemkin, that runs the SaaStr events out of the Bay Area. And he gives on a pretty much daily basis tidbits on what to do, what not to do as a founder. And most of them, actually, many of them apply definitely to sales, fundraising, and stuff like that. So if you're ever thinking of running your own company, he's definitely one of the best people to follow. Otherwise, there's a bunch of other really cool sales leaders / influencers, whatever you want to call them, where they do share a lot of knowledge free of charge on LinkedIn.
That's awesome. Favorite quote, mantra, or saying that inspires you as a sales leader?
I would say watch your CAC is the main quote. So what you can see on the macro level is that acquiring net new dollars is becoming a lot more expensive, and a lot of sales leaders don't watch their CAC. And you'll be surprised. They're just burning through tons of money, but they actually are not acquiring very effectively their customers. And really, the smartest leaders that I know, they always watch their CAC very carefully, CAC payback period and stuff like that. But I always say, watch your CAC. And I think that's my favorite quote.
That's awesome. And then finally, what's your most important goal or project that you're working on right now, Frank?
So the most important goal this year is to hit the $10 million in ARR as a milestone, really. So it's following, again, Jason Lemkin and a bunch of other people that would say triple-double. We're in another triple that we have to do this year. And that's what we're up to. And that's really the main milestone of the business. We're optimizing everything in the business from product engineering to sales, marketing, et cetera, to hit that 10 million.
That's awesome. We'll love to watch your growth, Frank. It is a fascinating company. It's a fascinating time. Loved your perspective here. Appreciate you sharing that with all the sales leaders out there. And if they want to learn more about Salesforge, connect with you, Frank, how do they check you out?
Probably LinkedIn is the best spot. So Frank Sondors, the guy with the bacon emoji. So if somebody doesn't know what bacon means, go to ChatGPT and do ask yourself, what does bacon mean in sales? There's a little homework for some people that are listening in. You'll be still surprised at the amount of people that don't know what bacon stands for. So that's definitely number one place. Then if you want to check out the site, it's salesforge.ai. But otherwise, you can also find me next, Frank Sondors, on there as well.
Awesome, Frank. Well, this was great. I love the conversation. It's really fascinating to see what's happening in our space and how we can maneuver and become more effective. And listeners, thanks so much for joining us. I hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did. You could always reach out to me too with any questions, guests you want to have on the program. I'm active on LinkedIn. But until next time, thanks so much.